taken care of for the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, starting from the left, please, for roll call.
Tyler Go, present.
Ken Kunzman, present.
Bill Irwin, present.
Mitch O'Bray, present.
Kevin Fenderson, present.
Hogan Heathington, present.
Kathy Wells, present.
All righty. Item number 2, visitors' comments. Anyone wishing to address the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board must complete a speaker's request form and return it to the administrative assistant in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act. The Parks and Recreation Advisory Board is restricted in discussing or taking action on items that are not posted on the agenda. Action on your statement can only be taken at a future meeting. In order to expedite the flow of business and to provide all visitors the opportunity to speak, the chairperson may impose a 3-minute limitation on any person addressing the board. And I assume we don't have anybody. That brings us to number 3. Parks and Recreation Advisory Board reports on items of community interest pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 5510415. The Park Board may report on the following items: 1, expression of thanks, congratulations, or condolences; 2, information about holiday schedules; 3, recognition of individuals; reminders about upcoming park events; information about community events; and announcements involving intimate threat to public health and safety. All right, brings us down to item number 4. Approve the minutes of the regular meeting of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board held on October 17th. Do we hear a motion to approve?
I'd like to make the motion to approve with the amendment of adding Ken Kunzman as present for that meeting,
Okay.
and Kevin Fenderson accepting the nomination via email.
I made those changes in the,
I'm sorry?
I made
Yeah.
those changes.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I make the motion to approve the minutes.
All right, do we have a second?
I will second it.
All righty, thank you. All right, and item number 5, approve the minutes from the special called meeting of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board held on November 7th. Do we hear a motion to approve that?
Move to approve.
All righty, do we hear a second?
I will second that as well.
All right, thank you. Item number 6, discuss and provide a recommendation to City Council pursuing a lease agreement for Peninsula Park in the shoreline areas between Lakeside Community Park and Pilot Knoll Park with the Corps of Engineers. I'm sorry?
Call for the vote. After you get a motion to approve
Oh
and
goodness,
second.
I'm
All
sorry.
those-
I'm
all those in
sorry
favor?
about that. I was going strictly on business there. So do we hear a vote for,
I'll just call all those in favor.
all those in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Do I need to repeat that, Terry? Okay, so go to number 6 again, I'm sorry. Discuss and provide a recommendation to City Council pursuing a lease
No,
agreement.
Number 5. Call for the vote on
Oh,
5.
because we didn't do number 4, I'm sorry about that. So item number 5, approve the minutes from the special called meeting of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board held on November 7th.
All those in favor?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Now we're back to 6. Discuss and provide a recommendation to City Council pursuing a lease agreement for Peninsula Park and the shoreline areas between Lakeside Community Park and Pilot Knoll Park with the Corps of Engineers.
Good evening.
Hey, Brian.
Hey, Brian.
Good to see you all tonight.
Good to see you.
Obviously, Phil's not here. He's still out, and I'm filling in for him tonight, and wanted to discuss this agenda item with you.
Up the volume.
Sorry, can you hear me? Is that better?
That's
Yes.
much
Oh,
better.
okay. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Hopefully you had a chance to read the agenda briefing, and I won't read everything word for word, but just to go ahead and talk a little bit about the background of this item. In the special meeting you mentioned on November 7th of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, our staff was asked to provide information regarding Peninsula Park and the shoreline between Lakeside Community Park and Pilot Knoll. While we have a lease with the Corps of Engineers for some of our lakeside parks, we do not have a lease for that property at this time. Our lease for those other parks, it was a 20-year lease, actually ended September 30th, 2021, and we're working with Corps of Engineers now to renew that lease. But again, it doesn't include this property we're talking about tonight. We have received a letter from the Corps of Engineers, a letter of intent for renewing the lease on our other properties, and it's a lengthy process, and we're still working on that, as I said. What we have done, the progress we've made so far is our Parks and Rec Director, Phil, he did contact the Corps, and they said that they would be willing to consider a standalone lease for that property, Peninsula Park and that shoreline. If the city is willing to address some of the illegal activity that goes on in that area, such as tree trimming and mowing by the residents, installation of boat docks, and storing some unauthorized watercraft, that type of thing. The other thing we've done is we've obtained a quote from McAdams, a consultant, to provide an impact and feasibility study for that land, if we were to take on that land. The cost of that feasibility study would be $47,500. That's the cost to the city. And that's something we would definitely require if we were going to move forward and try to obtain that type of lease with the Corps. So tonight, I guess we're having a discussion, or asking the board to have a discussion and make a recommendation to the city council. And we have three options to move forward with the feasibility study, or to recommend that we move forward or not move forward. Number one, we can make a recommendation to request funding immediately, or for the study to be done immediately for that shoreline in Peninsula Park. Option number two, the board could recommend that we request funds through the budget process for the feasibility study to come out of the 2023-2024 budget. And our third option is to do nothing and leave everything as is. Currently, the recommendation of the city staff was to not do anything at this time because we are in the process of renewing that other lease. So, but now it's up to the board, I guess, if you want to discuss, have any questions, and make a recommendation for us to go forward.
I have a question. So Brian, you're indicating that city staff is recommending to do nothing and leave as is because of the lease application that we're currently undergoing with the Corps. Is that correct?
Correct.
Assuming that that lease agreement is executed at some point, is city staff of a different opinion at that point?
Possibly. That's something, like I said, I would have to discuss with the director and have him inform you at a future meeting. Again, tonight I'm just filling in for him and giving his report.
Yep, no, I understand that, and I think that's very helpful. It's just, if we were to make a recommendation that was not in sync with city staff recommendation, I'm just curious if at some point that recommendation might be very different if that lease, and assuming it is going to be executed, is done. And could you describe what is the complicating factor for staff with having that current lease not executed?
What I've been told is the cost of the feasibility study, and also the additional maintenance that may come with obtaining this other land. Also, the city having to enforce the illegal activity instead of the Corps of Engineers who owns the property now.
Great, thank you.
Yes, sir.
So we're at liberty to discuss this amongst ourselves and with you.
Yes.
Do you know if the Corps seemed to be dead set that they would be willing, if we would only if we would do these following enforcement activities? Or was that something where that's just something they tossed in there that's negotiable? Because I don't see any way that we could enforce anything that doesn't really belong to us in that fashion.
My understanding is we would be responsible for the enforcement activities if we take on that lease of that property.
So let me rephrase that. Do you know if they were willing to negotiate that particular aspect of it?
I don't believe so. That's something I would have to discuss with Phil, though, and get back to you on.
Okay.
Okay, so just a couple clarification questions. It's been 2 years since we applied for the new lease, just to renew the leases. And at this point, we're just waiting for them to approve it. But we still don't know when that's going to happen, correct?
Correct.
Okay, but it's already been 2 years.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it could be another week, it could be another year, it could be another 2 years. So in the meantime, they want us to operate as we are. We don't have a lease even of Copperas and Pilot Knoll. But then they want us to take ownership of going through and addressing these issues that they have, even if we don't have the lease. In other words, they're asking us to enforce the tree trimming, the boat docks, everything else.
No, that would only be if we were to take on a lease.
Yeah, but even if we were to take on a lease and apply for a lease, right now the assumption would be that's going to take a 2-year process.
It's possible.
I mean, it's not going to happen in a week or two.
Right. And just to clarify, what we're asking for now is a recommendation to do the feasibility study, which we would have to do first before discussing the lease.
Well, I got a separate opinion on a feasibility study, but right now, the Corps is saying if we wanted to lease those properties and apply for a lease, they're telling us that they want us to enforce the issues that are wrong.
As part of the lease. Not now, that would be if we had the lease.
So again, going back to assuming it's going to take a year or two to get that lease approved, to apply for it and get it approved, then that means there's no enforcement until we take ownership of it through a lease.
Right, currently it would be on the Corps of Engineers to enforce that,
Who's doing nothing?
which, yeah, and that's not something we can make them do. That's,
It's a federal government.
yeah, it's a federal agency that we have no control over, but they are responsible for enforcing the illegal activity at this time.
And they have been made aware of that illegal activity, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Question. Are we responsible to address the illegal tree trimming, mowing, boat docks, unauthorized storing of vessels at the leased properties that we're currently waiting for the final execution on that lease?
I don't, that's something I would check. I would assume so, but I would probably need to go back and look at that contract just to make sure.
I'm just curious if they're specifying that we would have those new responsibilities for this new leased property, or is that responsibilities that we currently have for all the, all the property
Same.
under?
It should be all the same.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I would say right now, we're taking care of Pilot Knoll and Copperas,
Yeah.
because there's really no issues there with infringement on the core property or illegal tree trimming. So right now, we're maintaining those 2 parks with minimal maintenance as far as the core property goes.
Right.
Right. Well, I'm just trying to understand if the tree trimming, mowing, boat docks, and unauthorized storing of vessels is a new responsibility that they're asking us to consider for this new property that shoreline properties, right? Or if we already have those responsibilities as, well, you're saying we don't have any issues, it doesn't mean we don't have the responsibility.
So that is something that perhaps you could check with staff on,
I
check
can
with the
check into
city
that.
on, and come back and give that to us.
Yes, sir.
We have issues with boat docks, but we don't have any, it's not our responsibility right now to notify those homeowners to remove the boat docks. Right now, that's the Corps' responsibility.
Well, I think
But
some of
that's
those
core
boat docks are grandfathered in as well.
Amar?
Yeah,
Just a few on the east side.
yeah, right.
But all the new ones on the west side, there's 25 illegal boat docks.
Okay.
And on the east side, east of Sunset Point, there's an additional 5 illegal.
Okay.
The other 10, 12 boat docks are grandfathered because they were put in before 1974.
Okay.
So what we're talking about is all the illegal boat docks that are
Got it.
appearing. And I'm just concerned if we don't do anything for 2 years, they're asking us to take responsibility now, even though it's not our lease, it's their property.
Well, they're not asking us to take responsibility now. That would be if we were to lease the property. Then we would be responsible for enforcement.
Okay.
But
So
not
in the
now.
meantime, though, nothing probably will happen except for more boat docks to appear.
It's possible.
Probably
Yes,
very
sir.
possible. $44,000. What's the scope of services for the $44,000 quote?
That's not something I have in front of me tonight. I would have to get back to you on the scope of services. I wasn't involved in that process.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just going to give my opinion now. That's an awful lot of money with no information what we're even going to get to make a recommendation to spend 44. I mean, I'm against spending $44,000 on an assessment. Because the assessment's going to tell us, do you want to lease the shoreline or not? Which I know my opinion is we need to take ownership of the shoreline. So I don't need an assessment to tell me that. If the assessment's going to tell us the maintenance cost or the enforcement cost, I don't see $44,000 expense to give me those two figures. So I'm just going to give my opinion. There's nothing I'm going to hear tonight that's going to make me want to recommend $44,000 for an assessment study that we don't know what it comprises of. But at the same time, I just hate to keep sitting here and nothing's going to happen for another, who knows. I'd like to see us meet with the Corps of Engineers so we can ask them some specific questions. Where are we at with the current leases? Is Highland Village the only city that's having issues with illegal boat docks? How do they enforce it? Is it a letter sent to the homeowner? And how long are they given to remove the boat docks that are illegal? I mean, I got a lot of questions for the Corps. And right now, it's their responsibility, but they're doing nothing. It would take a year or two to get the lease for it to become our responsibility. And in the meantime, I just think the shoreline will continue to get more and more out of hand. I'd rather see us work with the Corps, address the current issues now. We don't have to discuss the lease, but I'm not real sure why they're afraid to discuss the lease for the shoreline and how that's going to impact our current leases. That's 2 years in the waiting, and I'd really like to know what's the holdup and why we can't get those things signed off by somebody. So that's pretty much.
Bill, you keep saying 44,000. I'm looking at a number 47.5. Are we have the same number?
It's the same, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
Whatever.
47.5.
okay.
I just know it was a lot for we don't know.
It seems like a lot.
For we don't know what it's even going to give us. So.
You know, and what Bill is,
Have you seen that?
Well, I was going to,
Oh, I'm sorry.
let me give you an update. We do actually have the lease back from the Corps, and it's going to be recommended to council within the next meeting or two. Oh, sorry. We have received the proposed lease just this last week back from the Corps, and so we've reviewed it, and we are presenting that to council for their approval. So that's just about done for our current parks.
So we received it back and we're presenting it to council for their okay to
Yes.
sign off on it?
Yeah, that just happened the last few days.
So we could be within a week or 2 or 3 of having the leases of Pilot and Old
They'll
Compass?
either be in the next council meeting or the following.
But do you know if those leases have been signed by the Corps themselves?
They've presented it to, I believe we'll sign it, then they sign it.
Okay.
And I'm not
So
going
it's, so it's not, it has not been
to,
signed yet?
absolutely done until everybody's signed.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay,
Okay.
Wasn't sure you were up.
that'll help a lot.
No, it wasn't. Thank you.
so I had something on that, if I may. The unauthorized well, let's just call it encroachments. These would be encroachments on core property done by private property owners. It's hard for us we don't own the property, we merely lease it. Could we not, as a city, take in our future discussions with the Corps on a lease for the shoreline, take and make them aware of encroachments for their enforcement action? And we would be able to do that, I would think, with minimal effort, minimal costs. Is that something that has been discussed with them, or could we perhaps do that discussion with them?
I think we could. My understanding is they have been made aware of the encroachments.
Sure.
Yes.
But as part of having this lease, they say, if you will do the following. Well, I think probably legally, and I'm not a lawyer or an attorney, but I would think legally we can't do some of that. That is theirs to do. But we could make them aware of it for further enforcement. And that would be part of the negotiation with the Corps on a future lease. And what Bill was saying, for us to wait for whatever period of time, another month, another 2 months, we get one lease done, now we want to start moving with the other one, I would think we need to move as quickly as we possibly could to start pushing this forward instead of just waiting. Because I've been around, as some of the others have, seen some of this encroachment, and when that starts to get enforced, it's going to be noisy. It'll be very noisy, but it wasn't their property in the first place. And I think we need to get ahead of it as quickly as we possibly can.
Okay.
Well, think through this with me. I guess if the current lease is going to City Council for ratification, then that ship has sailed. And if the staff is recommending to not move forward on the shoreline and Pinnacle Park, then that seems to me there's at least, well, 2 obstacles. One, staff recommendation not to do anything. And secondly, City Council, who will have moved forward to adopt the lease, not thinking that there's any more lease work to be done, right?
Well, the thing is too with this is that when it says do nothing and leave as is, that we can always revisit as things evolve and come back, that we can make those changes and, come back to propose something to City Council to be able to make any changes, obtain a lease. It's, until those documents are signed for the ones that we've been waiting for 2+ years on, it's going to be very, very important to make sure we have those set in stone. Because if we don't, then that could jeopardize the cabins. That can jeopardize a lot of things down the road.
Yeah, and I think that lease is going to get done. There's, I don't think anything controversial, and in fact, there are the cabins as an added advantage for the community if there's approved. I just think that the window kind of closes on the conversation of, are there other properties to protect under a lease agreement with the Corps and the city?
Right. But to go back to the staff's recommendation, my understanding was the staff was going to recommend approval of an assessment study. And that's really what you're looking for tonight, either to budget it this year or budget it next year.
Right.
And that's the staff's recommendation, or does the staff's recommendation really do nothing?
Well, I know when I wasn't aware that the lease was renewed. I was just made aware of that too. But I know when we had our meeting, it was we were waiting on that other lease. That was the main holdup.
Right, and I can see why it was to do nothing, because we didn't want to jeopardize the 2 leases that are being renewed.
Yes,
and
sir.
that's really what we're waiting on.
Right.
But now that it seems like we've got those 2 leases almost signed off, is the staff's recommendation still do nothing and just let more boat docks appear? And
Well, let me,
I'll let Ken answer that one.
I'm sorry, I don't want to step over Brian. We've had discussions on this, and this is something that's come up some years back. the police department would not support us enforcing the Corps' enforcement of the shoreline. I tell you that. We're short-staffed already, and to add additional responsibility and cost, and then looking forward, we're going to be challenged. And I'll speak from the financial standpoint. We have to start boxing in what we do as a city as we approach build-out, because our revenues are going to flatten out, and the high service level that we provide, if we keep adding more to it, we're not going to be able to sustain that. Point simple. We want to do everything we possibly can, but the big picture of this, as we look at it, we understand that this is kind of a gem and we want to protect it, and it is designated by the Corps as, there's limited anything that can be done to it anyway, and it is available and people use it. So from a city standpoint, it's hard for us to see what advantage we have to incur a large degree of increased liability with all the enforcement. That is a no-win situation for city. I guarantee that. Are we frustrated with the Corps for not doing that? Yes. But ultimately, it is their responsibility to do so, and I wouldn't presume that it's never going to happen. They could next week decide they're going to do an effort to do it. We don't know that. I wouldn't hold my breath per se, probably, for that. But from a perspective of saying to do nothing, it's not that we absolve ourselves and we don't care about this, but we have the advantage of being able, our residents use it, and it is, there's really not a lot of maintenance. It's meant to be more of a natural setting and taken care of that way. And so we don't really have a huge vested advantage in doing so. If we want to look at a study and we do it as part of our budget process and we evaluate that with all our other projects, we would always be amenable to that. We always welcome suggestions for that from our boards or even residents to consider projects, but it should be viewed in context of other competing priorities and things that we need to do for the city because we don't have unlimited resources. So I would say we don't have a recommendation to do the study per se, because that's not necessarily a path we see best to go from. But if it's something that you all want to view or pursue more information on, and that would be the next step, that would be, I would at least suggest that we do that as part of the budget process. And whether or not that gets approved or funded, that would be in the bigger scope of how we do all our projects in that sense. But that's kind of where we're at right now. The Corps makes, it's basically like a poison pill to do the enforcement. And there has never been an appetite from the city perspective because we have nothing to gain and just lots of grief and expense that's going to come with that.
So as far as like a emergency 911 along the Corps property, right now our police department would
Public safety, yes.
answer that, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So when you say taking on the responsibilities, it's mostly the enforcement?
Yes.
In the future, if people put up a boat dock and the letter has to go out, this must be removed, this hasn't been approved.
Well, I think the issue is more with what's there currently, and it's been there for a while, and there's going to be a lot of pushback. And for police to have to patrol that and deal with that, it's just added responsibility, and it takes, that personnel is always required for increased activity for police enforcement of that regard. So it's, anything can be done, but there's always a cost with it, and is the cost justify it? And currently, our general viewpoint is, at this point in time, it does not. And Mitch appropriately said that, this could be revisited anytime in the future if circumstances change or we have a different perspective or the Corps adjusts their perspective on this. I wouldn't rule any of that out. But at this point in time, with what we've been given, that would be our standpoint. The board's free to feel how they feel and their recommendation, and we will certainly accommodate that appropriately.
kind of had just one little question for Brian too. Just to clarify a few things, and please correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
As of right now, today, what is today, the 20th of February? City of Highland Village has no jurisdiction down there at Peninsula Park, okay?
Correct.
So in order to address these, and I'm going to first and foremost say, you can't be claiming that property as yours to a homeowner down there. You can't be claiming that. I'm sorry. You can't be putting signs up there for that. You can't do that. It's not yours. But until we do, say we do obtain a lease, that could take 1 to 2 years before that's officially enforced, I guess. Say we did acquire that lease, and we're in charge of enforcing it. That's 2 years down the road, minimum. I mean, just based off of the last, lease that we got, that's the timeline. And as of right now, I mean, unless the Corps does something now, that's our only option to start enforcing these items. And to be able to get a lease, we're talking 2+ years, at this point. We can start the process, and that's why do nothing and leave as is. I'm on this board because I want to preserve and protect all of our parks. It's just $47,500 is a lot of money to start with a feasibility study because it has to be studied and sent to council. There's illegal activity down there. The Corps has got to get involved, and we can only do so much. And hopefully everybody takes that into account to kind of realize that, at this point, because it's very important. Like I said, I don't want to sound like a broken record. There's illegal stuff down there. Has to get changed. Somebody's got to do something, period. But coming back and looking at this, as things evolve, I think it's going to be the best option. And if we want to spend $47,500 and that's what we're in agreement to, great. That's what we're going to send to council. I mean, it's just kind of one of those things. I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that in terms of the costs involved and, in terms of what the city's standpoint is. I've had numerous conversations with them about it. And like I said, I want to preserve every ounce of parks that we have in this city and gain more and more and more. It's just, we got to be very careful on how we do it and keep the leases that we do have that are still pending. That's pretty much what I wanted to discuss about.
Yeah, well, I would just add that there are other entities that are involved. There's at least one homeowners association that is aware that they have HOA property that either abuts to or leads to Army Corps trailheads. I think it could be worth having that conversation with them about creating some additional and more public notice that these are trail access points. And I think one of the concerns that's been articulated is that as the city was developed out, there were specific pieces of property set aside in lieu of development fees, and those parcels were specifically set aside for community lake access. You can drive up and down the city Highland Village all day, and you will not see a single sign that says lake access, either for fishing activity, for recreational trails, for bicyclists. You either know where the trailhead is or you don't. Some of them are very well marked on Google Maps, on our maps that we have for Highland Village parks. Some designated apparently in error that they're park space. But there's really no point, no public indication that this is how, if you're a resident of Highland Village or from out of town, this is how you get to the lake. And I will say that at one level, access to trails, access to outdoor activities, and access to that lake is a very key community asset. And I think that's what you're hearing is some concern over how do we protect that community asset going forward and protect it against the encroachment, that either encroachment or just lack of recognition that here is an important public access point. And it could be a piece of property between somebody's houses, and I've seen them, and I would never think that that's a public point of access.
Yeah.
And there's certainly no indication at that point that that is and has been set aside for the public as lake access.
And if I could add to that, there is no sign that says this is public access, but there is in at least one case a sign that says this is private property.
Two.
Okay? There's 2 cases of that. And so,
Oh, there's
4
4.
cases. I mean,
There's
so
more
as you
signs
go,
down
you
there.
hear more and more, and people that want to come there, they would see it says, this is private. Oh, okay, well, it's private property, when in fact it's not. And that's, I think, what it bothers me, because we need that type of access, and that is part of what we have paid for over the years.
Yeah.
We paid for it by taking that access point in lieu of, and I don't know, I have issues with that. And the individuals likely know that when they put those private property signs there. But if nobody's going to say anything, then you just keep encroaching further and further. If I may, I have a couple of items. I would like for the next time that we have a meeting to find out if there are other cities that have encroachment issues on core property that is abutting their city limits. And you don't have to approach every one of them, but it'd be nice to know if they are also having these type of issues. Because I think, and anybody here can please tell me, in 74 or whenever it was, they said that there will be no more dock building. We will grandfather those that are already built. Was that for the entire lake? And if that was for the entire
core
lake,
property.
all core property, then I would venture to say there's going to be other towns and cities that have this very same issue. Question, I don't need a precise number. I'm not looking for a precise number. But when we have leases with the Corps, like the one that we're bringing up and about to sign to go forward with, are those very expensive leases, or are they, I'm just making up a number, $25 and that covers you for 25 years? Because we know that you're going to be adding things to this property to bring residents and other people who want to utilize the Corps property, you're enhancing that. And that's what the Corps wants to have occur. So is it a minimal cost for a lease? Because if we're looking at these in the future, Peninsula Park and other shoreline areas, then the cost for the lease, if that is minimal or negligible, then we cannot worry about that as a cost issue. I mean, I don't want to find us in a place where we have to spend so much money, we can't afford to keep doing this. We just can't. But if it is minimal and minor, then minimal and minor.
0.
Okay, well, minimal and minor anyway. Then the only other costs go with police, but we already have that if somebody makes a call. The other cost would be maintenance of it. Well, if it's a natural trail, then the maintenance becomes zilch or very minor because it's a natural trail. If something washes out, it washes out. You find another way. They're like animal trails or, wildlife trails. And I just think the cost would be minor. But I did not have the answer on the lease, so I appreciate that. Thank you. And one more.
I was going to say if there was,
Bring details of what comprises the study that's $47,000. I'd like to know, as Bill said, what is it that we're going to get from this? Those are 2 items I'd like to see. So are there other cities with encroachment issues? And what is going to comprise in that study?
Okay.
But I don't know, I think that probably takes a motion. Do we request that through a motion, or is that just something that we've asked?
well, is there any more discussion, just regarding this?
I had a question at least. When is the budget process for 2023, 2024 starting?
You'll probably kick off in June, and it'll be through the summer.
Okay.
October 1st is the new fiscal year. So it would likely be approved in the two reads in September. So
Okay.
over the summer months would be
Okay.
the timeframe.
All right, thank you. So there's no urgent pressure to, even if we decided we wanted to do the funds for budget process, that didn't even start until June. So we have a few more meetings until then if we decide that we want to move forward with this. And like my other board members have said, I also would like to be interested in what McAdams is planning on doing in their assessment for the city. Because like they said, if it's just saying, oh, you either buy it or you don't, you get the lease or you don't, well, that's not very helpful. If they come in and they say, well, here are very specific things and steps that you might need to be considering, like you'll have to completely redo this part of the shoreline trail because it's falling into the water and it has no access to it, or you're going to have to remove all these trees because they've fallen across the trail and they're blocking major access points, or whatever they have to say. That might be more important information. So I'd be interested in what McAdams specifically is wanting to do with this quote.
Okay. Understood.
Yeah, it's definitely one thing about just throwing a number out there, but what's all involved. But
Right.
yeah, I
Okay.
very much agree. So we would all definitely need to be updated on that.
And just as a general statement, I mean, people are showing that they're caring as we go further in this millennium, they're caring more and more about natural spaces in their cities. They want to go to places where they're not inside their home, they're not in front of a screen, they're not sitting at a desk. Highland Village is one of the few cities in this entire DFW complex that gives their citizens that. And we pride ourselves on being able to do it. And we're also in a very unique situation where we're right up against a lot of lakeshore property. There are only 4 major lakes in the DFW area, maybe 5, because over there by Rockwell, Grapevine, Louisville, Ray Roberts, White Rock, and White Rock's basically developed completely. There's no natural trails, it's all sidewalks. But we have a very unique opportunity here to make sure that our shoreline is protected and has access to not only our citizens, but other citizens of the area who are going to come in and enjoy the spaces and treat it and love it the way we do. So I know that there's a lot of frustration on the board as well with our current situation here, because we are seeing some situations where there is encroachment, where we're not able to enjoy it, where we don't have that access. It's not known to the citizens. They just think the lake's there and they can get there through Pilot Knoll, they can get through Copperas. And they might not even know that they can get there through Copperas now because they just don't have the desire to do it anymore because they felt like, no, that's just a lake. I'll get there through Pilot Knoll if I want to, or I'll find another access. So I think it's very important for us to continue these discussions, and I'm glad that we're having the conversation. And I would agree as of right now, until we know more about the assessment, I don't really want to move forward with sending anything to council about it. Thank you.
So before I make the motion to do nothing, just a couple of highlights. Kevin hit the nail on the head. One thing that we can be doing is working with the HOAs, Castlewood and Highland Shores, to make at least the board aware of the access points, because there's 15 access points in Highland Shores that service 1,800 homes. Kevin lives in Highland Shores. Tyler lives in Highland Shores. We're blessed to have Brian Fiorenza here tonight, our council member who lives in Highland Shores. But I would think in the meantime, maybe a delegate of representatives could work with the HOAs to at least let the public be aware of these access points, okay? Knowing that it's still going to, for now, stay core property. I'm in agreement until we get this final thing signed by all parties and it's official. We now have 25-year leases that we should do nothing. But as soon as that's signed on the dotted line, I'd like to have a meeting, the next meeting, Parks Board meeting after that. I'd like to have the core here so that we can ask a lot of these questions, but also ask them about enforcement, because right now it's going to be up to them to enforce the shoreline and the encroachment. So we need to have the core and understanding, is it just our city's problems or just a lot of questions? So once we have this thing signed, then the next meeting, I think we could have the core present. And if need be, I think we could have the Denton County Commissioner representative here, and I'll even go as far as say Dr. Burgess's, Congressman Burgess's representative here, because we've got to start getting answers from the core. What are they going to do to enforce the shoreline? Then if we decide at that point that it's still to our advantage to lease it, then we can go ahead and do an assessment. but have a detailed breakdown. Here's what we're going to assess, and this is what it's going to cost. So we could be talking 3 months from now, 6 months from now. If it's something we want to try to get budgeted into the 23, 24 budget, we'd have to do that within the next meeting or two.
Well,
Okay, but we don't even need to go that far yet until we get these lease signed and then have our meeting with the Corps.
I was going to say, yeah, let's make sure and get that signed all in stone first.
Yeah.
And then we can go with that, but
So it really doesn't take a motion
No.
to do nothing,
Do
right?
nothing.
No.
Right.
Yeah, you need to recommend.
We need to make, okay. So I'm
Bill,
going to make,
I've got, I think, maybe a slightly different tact. And I would like to forward a recommendation that the Park Department continue to discuss with the Park Advisory Board specific areas of lake encroachment and public access signage for lake access trailheads. And I think if we send that message back to staff, that we want to continue this conversation, that we want to invite all of those folks into this conversation that you just mentioned, I think that can happen. But I think we ought to send a very clear message back to the staff that we want to continue this conversation.
so if that was your motion, I'll second it.
Okay? I'll give you the language, Terry.
And that is a motion on the McAdams feasibility study only. Is that correct?
No, sir.
It's an add-on to do nothing and leave as is, right?
Well, just have continued discussions, basically.
It's like continue, it's almost taking out 3 and say, I guess, do nothing at this point, but still open this for future discussions, correct?
I don't want to go on record as saying that we should do nothing. Something's being done, the leases are being renewed.
Well, because we can just scratch that out, but I'm just trying to understand.
Right, so I'm making my motion was to recommend that the Park Department continue to discuss with the Park Advisory Board specific areas of lake access encroachment and public access signage for lake access trailheads.
I still
And you
second
seconded that.
Okay.
And that leaves it open for future meetings, future discussions about the shoreline and leases.
And so and that was,
And hold off on the feasibility study
yes,
at
we
this time.
know zip about it.
Because it says they received a quote, so
Yeah,
they
but he-
like our recommendation.
So we can just
need to
tack
be
that
able to
on to the
tell
end of
them
the motion.
At this time, tack that on at the end of that motion.
If you would like, Kevin, it's your motion.
It's not in the motion to approve any money or to make the recommendation for feasibility study. It's only just to continue discussions.
Well, it's a part of the ongoing discussions, right? I think at some point when Phil's back, we can
I
ask
don't
him.
have a problem with the motion that it is. I just don't think it addresses the 47.5 assessment or study that they're looking for our recommendation on.
But we can
I don't think they
table
are.
it until we get the information on the scope of work and the study, maybe.
works.
Yeah.
I was going to say, we could just table the entire discussion.
Well, if it's not in the motion, then
Do nothing doesn't say we're not gonna do anything at all, period.
Yeah.
We're dropping it. It's what you're
At this
saying is
time.
We're gonna not recommend that we go forward with the feasibility study, but continue discussion. So essentially it is we're not gonna recommend the feasibility study at this time, but this is what we're gonna pursue. Am I correct, Ken?
Now, Brian, does the city council require a feasibility study to consider something like this? Would you know that?
I don't know that. I mean, we were going to bring this to council to see if
Yeah.
they would approve it or not. Yeah.
Okay.
You need to take a vote.
I know, I'm processing. Okay. All righty. So do we hear a motion? Let's just
Yes.
do it.
And it was
Yeah,
seconded.
and it was seconded. So do we hear an all in favor?
all in favor say aye.
Say aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes. All right.
Thank you.
I do have something else to add. It had been mentioned here that maybe we bring the Corps here to talk with us for discussions. Before the Corps ever comes, I would like to know if there are other cities also having encroachment problems that they're dealing with.
I wrote that down as an action item for us to research.
Okay, but I meant before we would ever have the Corps show up. Okay, thank you.
Has the Corps ever spoke before to this board?
Say what?
I was wondering if the Corps ever spoke before to the board. I don't I don't know the possibility or the likelihood of them actually.
We've had meetings, like, maybe get 2 or 3 of us with the Corps.
Okay.
I know Phillips had meetings, plenty of meetings probably with the Corps, but I can't remember ever having the Corps here. But I think there's going to be a lot of questions to the Corps. And it's not like that we're going to put them on the spot, but I'd really like to understand the enforcement process. Is it a letter sent to the homeowner? Can we get those addresses and self-addressed stamped envelope and hand it to the Corps and say, put your form letter in here, here's our violators? I mean, I don't know what the process is to remove the boat docks, but we're going to go through another summer, and I guarantee you there's going to be another 12 to 20 boat docks added with how fast they've been putting them up there.
It's surprising to me because we have a lake house up in Grand Lake up in Oklahoma and everything. We have to pay a permit, dock permit every year. And it's Grand Rapid Dam Authority that manages that and everything. And if you don't pay your dock permit, I mean, you're like out of luck. They'll shut your power down to your boat dock. You can't use your lift. I mean, it's strict. And it's like every year, and it's a due date, and it's hardcore, and it's mailed to the homeowners. And so I'd be interested to see if the Corps has something like that on Lake Louisville.
Is that the boat docks in Sneaky Pete's side or our
Well,
side
ours
of
is
the
in,
bridge?
our boat dock's in Oklahoma.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I mean, it's the same concept though. Why wouldn't they have something like that here? Do they or do they not? Are they not following up with it? Is it all falling through the cracks? And even to put a boat dock in, you'd have to get a permit to put a boat dock in. So for people to arbitrarily throw a boat dock in, that's like a major encroachment. So I'm just floored that that even happens.
So you say that you get a letter from the water authority for the lake?
Yes.
Who's our current water authority for Lake Louisville?
Upper Trinity.
Trinity.
Upper Trinity? I wonder if they have any
I mean, somebody has to be
process on
managing
something
that.
like that for this, or if it's fully the Corps of Engineers.
Yeah, I'd
The
be
Corps of
interested to know how they
Engineers
operate that.
Has a regional office, but the Louisville branch or Louisville Lake is managed by a lake manager. So each lake has their own lake manager.
Okay.
So that's really the one that we need to talk to. That's been the liaison for Philip for the leases too.
Yes, I'd really like to know what their whole process is and everything of like, how do you put a boat dock in? What are their procedures? What are their requirements? To run power down to the lake. I mean, that's like a liability issue in itself.
Oh, absolutely.
And you have to have electricians approve all the power going down to your boat dock, past your boat ramp, all that and everything. So I'd be interested in learning more about the Corps and everything, or whoever's managing the lake and how the boat dock, the whole process is of installing a boat dock, the approval process, manual maintenance, boat dock inspections. I mean, there's a lot of liability around that, especially when you have power going down to your boat dock for your lifts and that sort of thing.
I think most of them don't have power. I think they're temporary. No one's spending a ton of money to install one permanently because they know any moment it might not be there anymore. So I don't think any of them really do have power down there. Just from
So they don't
riding
have
along.
lifts on their boats?
What?
They don't have a lift
No.
for the boat?
There are extension cords down there.
Extension cords, but yeah.
That's even
Cords right
scarier
down in
because
the
then
water.
that's,
Yep.
Yeah.
And obviously, the lake fluctuates in height all the time. That's always going to change. That's why these are all temporary. And some of those docks down there, they're a pretty penny. I mean, some of them might be around $30,000, for something like that. Quite frankly, I don't know how you get one of those out, but that's not our thing.
boat docks are very expensive, I'll just tell you that.
No, absolutely. But Tyler, kind of go back to your question about the Corps coming here to a meeting. I've actually asked that to Phil personally. I don't think it's impossible, but it's going to be very difficult. Really what we're saying is that I think it's a good idea, definitely, because I had the same question, and I wanted to see if they would be able to come and represent here to ask those questions, just right to them. But just have to remember it's the federal government, it's not the city, and I don't want to make an excuse by any means by that, but there's a will, there's a way to get it done. I feel like it's going to be very difficult to do that. And I think we need to.
That's why we invite Congressman Burgess into the conversation.
And then we got to make sure those leases are in order first,
Yeah, we're not doing anything, so it's,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If you start bringing in Congressman Burgess, then it's going to be, you can pretty much look at all your leases for 10 years on in and pretty much say goodbye at that point. I mean, you could. You definitely
we're not doing
could.
anything till we get.
I
these
know,
two
we're not doing anything. I'm just saying if we go to Congressman Burgess and how the chain of command works is that could be very detrimental doing that because you're going above the boss and you need to go through the proper chains. I'm just saying that could be something very, very hairy. But any other discussion on this? Anything?
I'm good.
Good? All right. So let's go to number 7, receive an update of the comprehensive master plan.
The comprehensive master plan, the first read, was approved at the city council meeting last week on the 14th, February 14th.
Okay.
And that was a first pass?
Yes, sir.
Is there any discussion?
When is that up for second reading?
Next council meeting.
Next meeting.
At the-
Next meeting, sorry.
Anyone have any discussion on that? Any questions? All right. Item number 8, discussion of future agenda items. A board member may inquire about a subject of which notice has not been given, a statement of specific factual information, or of existing policy may be giving. Any deliberation shall be limited to a proposal to place the subject on an agenda for subsequent meeting. Anything else?
I've got one.
Okay.
And I apologize, I meant to send staff a picture, and I will, and that will be appropriate because then we can discuss this at an upcoming meeting. But at the Mike Levitt Pavilion at Doubletree Park, as you come down the stairway and approach the Grand Lawn, somewhere we decided to place a sign right at the end of those steps, right in the middle of that lawn. I only know that in very particular because my niece was married on that spot, and I don't know that she would have had a successful wedding with that sign in place. So I'm just very curious how we made that decision to put that sign at that particular location. I have a picture, Terry, I'll forward it to you, and maybe we can get that propped up so at least we have a visual to look at. It just seemed very odd because it absolutely deteriorates what is otherwise an exceptional view at that park.
I can speak on that a little bit. The sign actually can be removed. It's in a sleeve, and it can be taken out anytime. It was put in place because we had a lot of football teams coming out there practicing without permission on the Grand Lawn, and it was just an attempt to let people know that activity was not allowed. But it definitely can be removed at any time. We can take it in and out.
I've seen those signs elsewhere, so I know what their purpose is. It just seemed to be a highly odd location for that one. I didn't notice that it was on a sleeve, so if I were to rent that space for an outdoor wedding, would the city, would Parks Department provide me with information about how I can remove it, or is that something y'all would?
We would do that, yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Brian.
And I don't mean to be rude, but since that was a part of the future agenda items, I know that we need to add that to our next agenda for it to truly be officially discussed. So I guess, Terry, are we still adding that to the next agenda?
Well, I think I got my answer from Brian, so I'm,
Well,
no.
we're sure? Okay, no worries. Whatever you want. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Bill?
Just since Ken's here, this came up during the lease discussions, and how we used to pay for parks through impact fees. So I had asked Phil to give me how much every residential lot that was developed starting in the mid-90s was assessed an impact fee for linear parks, trails, neighborhood parks, and community parks. And I had asked him for how much those fees were, and he told me it's for the community park it was $684 per lot. $1447 for the neighborhood park, of which we could take land in lieu of those fees. And for the linear park trails, $287 per lot. And since the 90s, we've collected as a city over $2 million worth of impact fees. So all that is correct so far, right? We've never revised those fees since the mid-90s, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Well,
And I don't know how they apply to
I think they were revised once. I have to go back and look, but
Okay.
substantially the same.
But at that time, as a city, we weren't thinking about apartments and medium-density housing and everything else. It was residential lots. So for every lot built, we collected those fees. How is that assessed against, well, no, I guess what I'm asking you is just for the next meeting, I'd like to have an update on impact fees,
Okay.
what they currently are, how do they affect medium-density housing? Because with these 5 economic zones or undeveloped properties, I think it would be good to readdress that, and especially for council's sake, so that they know, number one, they probably need revised upward. How do they compare against other cities? But is it something that we want to look at and see how they apply to single lots and medium-density housing? So I'm not asking you for tonight,
Okay.
just for the next meeting.
Yeah, we can certainly do that.
Okay. Thank you.
One other item for the agenda, that Phil had talked about doing a spring event, kind of like the Wind Down with the Grinch, but do something in the spring. I'd just like to get an update on that at the next meeting, please.
Absolutely. Any other future agenda items anybody wants to discuss? No? All right, well, at this time, 7:01, we will adjourn this meeting until our March 20th meeting.